Hello, Facebook world. So today is Opera 101. I am here at my house. My name's Megan Thompson. I am the Director of Education and Outreach for Cleveland Opera Theater. And today I decided I'd like to start talking about the voice types we see in opera, because there's a lot. A lot of us know about some major categories, but we don't all realize how many subcategories there are within the voice type world. So I was actually going to try to cover like all of the voice types, and I realized that that might be a little much for a quick Opera 101. So instead, today we're going to just focus on female voice types in opera. So usually when we start talking about opera voice types, we are really starting with a few different major categories that we start breaking things down in. So usually we start with the vocal range, which means the actual pitches that somebody can sing. And then we start looking about how flexible is the voice. Can it move quickly? Can it navigate its way through passages of a lot of notes in a quick, easy manner? And then also, what's the timbre like? Timbre being the color of the voice, the weight of the voice. Is it a really big, heavy voice? Is it really light and fluttery? What is that all like? So all of these different pieces and parts are what go into classifying voice types. There's a system the Germans came up with, the Fach system, which is the predominant system used in opera to determine different voice types. So that's the one we're going to kind of look at today. And this system gets pretty specific. So often, while it seems like a great way to be really specific about what kind of a voice should sing what role, it's also very limiting, and often singers actually cross over voice types. So they might predominantly sing, say, a lyric soprano voice type, but maybe they also can sing a little bit of the coloratura repertoire, or maybe every now and then they jump into Spinto repertoire. So use all of these as guidelines, but never feel like somebody has to stick in their little box. So let's start at the top of the female voice types. So at the very top, you've got your sopranos. Sopranos have the highest female voice type. They're often the leading roles in opera. Not always, but I would say for every 2 or 3 leading soprano roles, then you'll have a lower voice as a leading female. So usually your sopranos are dominating those leading characters. Your voice range for an operatic soprano is typically right around the middle C on a keyboard, up to 2 octaves above that, plus usually an extension, like maybe up to an F. They don't often sing and hang out up there, but they usually have that ability in their voice type. So then within this high, so we have that big umbrella of sopranos in our high range. Amidst that, then we have some different breakdowns. So I was saying that some of the other things you have to look for are how flexible and what the colors are. So if you have a really flexible voice as a soprano, like really like can sing lots of really fast notes, you're really agile in your voice, you're probably falling into that coloratura range. Coloraturas are the ones who sing the really fast moving sections, and those are the ones that do tend to use that extension up to that F above the high C. So these roles have actually existed for the whole 400 years that opera's been around. They started in the Baroque era, they're still utilized today. They're often leading roles too. So some of the most famous roles for coloratura sopranos include Lucia in Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, Olympia in Offenbach's Tales of Hoffmann, and Gilda in Verdi's Rigoletto, and many, many more. But those are some of the big ones. And then you've probably seen some of the most famous singers like Diana Damrau or Kathleen Battle. They're some of the ones who have really dominated that repertoire over the years. Then something else we have our soubrettes. They tend to also have some of that flexibility, but usually not the same amount that our coloraturas do. Our soubrettes tend to have nice bright voices, very sweet tones. They're usually the younger, cheeky, coquettish characters in the opera. These roles can usually be very high, but they don't usually sit as high as a coloratura role would. So some of the characters might be like Papagena and Mozart's Magic Flute, Echo, one of the nymphs in Strauss's Ariadne auf Naxos, Despina in Mozart's Così fan tutte. And actually I would say a lot of Baroque and classical opera make use of the soubrette, and you see it a bit less when we get into more of our romantic and modern opera. Then when we move into some of our lyric sopranos, then we start seeing more of the full, rich sound. You have a lot of the same quality of the soubrette, but a more mature tone. So these tend to be more of like the adult roles, you know, like the grown-ups. Their tessitura tends to be a little bit higher than a soubrette, but still lower than a coloratura, usually only heading up to like the high C, maybe a D. These tend to be the first characters we think of a lot of times. So like Musetta in La Bohème, you know, our famous Quando men vo, that's a lyric soprano aria, usually. But then we also have like Manon and Massenet's Manon, we have Juliette in Gounod's Romeo et Juliette. So we have a lot of those leading ladies are usually lyrics. Some of the famous singers that we know of, you know, that tend to fall into this category, I should say, Renee Fleming, Lucia Popp, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf. It's kind of a nice big broad category. This is also where we start seeing a lot more of these folks who tend to be classified as lyrics, who stretch and do a little bit of other repertoire as well. Then we get into our dramatic sopranos. So dramatic sopranos, these are like the big voices. These are the ones who can be heard over a really large orchestra while still sounding nice and even throughout their range. They don't sound like they're pushing. It's safe for them to sing over a really big orchestra, which is very important. You never want to have somebody pushing to be heard over a large orchestra. So this really started becoming like the trend in the Romantic era, especially like our Wagnerian and Verdian and Puccini, all of these guys really started favoring these big voices, these dramatic voices. And so there were a lot of different roles in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then it's also a voice type that's still favored quite a bit today in operas that are being composed. So some of our more famous roles for our dramatic sopranos would be Brunhilde in Wagner's Ring Cycle, Salome in Strauss's Salome, Vanessa in Samuel Barber's Vanessa. Some of our famous singers, Maria Callas, you might know Jessie Norman, Christine Brewer. These are just some of those big voices. And it really started to be a thing at that point because Wagner, Verdi, Puccini were all expanding the size of the orchestra. So they needed to also be having larger voiced singers in these roles to sing over that larger orchestra. Another one, it's very similar to dramatic in a lot of ways, but the fifth and final soprano designation that you usually hear about is a spinto soprano. Now, it's similar in that there's a lot of power in this voice, but it's usually not quite the same size voice. It's usually not throughout the entire role. It's usually the same light, brilliant high notes that a lyric would have, but more of that heft that a dramatic has when you get to those big climaxes. And so, in fact, spinto actually translates to pushed. And so it pushed in a healthy way, but it's like Aida and Verdi's Aida has, you know, more of the lyric quality throughout, but then has those big climaxes that are very dramatic. Leonora in Il Trovatore by Verdi, Cho-Cho-san in Puccini's Madama Butterfly. So we've got some really big famous roles that fall into this spinto range. Then some of our famous singers, Renata Tebaldi, Leontine Price, Renata Scotto. These are some big names in the opera world who fit into this spinto category. And again, like I said, this is just, you know, big buckets. Never expect people to always stick in their box. They can cross, they do cross. In terms of some of the next category down, so we had soprano as our big high category. Then we move into our mezzo range. Mezzos tend to live in a slightly lower range than the soprano does. They tend to span usually from like the G below middle C, so a little bit lower than the soprano. And then they usually have up to that high C, but you don't often have that written into the music. Only a few roles go up there. Usually they cap off around like the A above high C, or I'm sorry, below high C. So there's a lot of roles that do stretch above and below, but they tend to live more in like the middle of the staff. They tend to really find their sweet spot in the treble staff. Mezzos tend to also get relegated to supporting roles, villains. There's actually a saying, this is family friendly, so I'll abbreviate it, but witches and breeches, so meaning pants roles. So you can kind of fill in that blank there. But they also tend to have a lot of the fun roles in this as well. And so sopranos broke down into 5 different subcategories. Mezzos tend to break into 3 major subcategories. So just like sopranos, we also have a coloratura mezzo. Coloratura mezzos, it's a very small niche, but it's very similar to the soprano coloraturas. These are fast-moving vocal lines. They have a lot of notes and pattern, a lot of coloratura passages in them. So roles would be like Angelina in Rossini's La Cenerentola, or Romeo in Bellini's I Cappelletti e I Montecchi. Giulio Cesare by Handel, the leading role of Julius Caesar, tends to be sung by a coloratura mezzo. And I had mentioned breeches as one of the categories that mezzos tend to fall into. Giulio Cesare, you notice that that's a man's role, Julius Caesar, or Romeo in Bellini's I Cappelletti e Montecchi. These pants roles are typically sung by women now, way back in the Baroque era, so like Handel. These were sung by castrati, but that's a practice we don't practice now. We don't tend to castrate any of our gentlemen singers to get them to maintain their high voices. So now our women sing those roles. So you see a lot of these coloratura mezzo roles living back in that Baroque era, things that had been written originally for castrati. And then there was a little bit of a resurgence around like Donizetti and Rossini's time. But then it's not a very popular voice type to write for now. Cecilia Bartoli is probably the singer you've heard the most who sings that kind of repertoire. She has some great recordings out there of coloratura mezzo rep, so definitely look her up on YouTube. Then we get into our lyric sopranos, or lyric mezzo sopranos, but again, very much like the lyric sopranos, our lyric mezzos tend to have more of the leading roles in the mezzo-soprano repertoire. They tend to be lyric roles. So like Carmen in Bizet's Carmen, or Charlotte in Massenet's Werther. So you have these like nice meaty roles, but this is also the voice type that tends to sing more of those trouser roles as well. So we've got Stefano in Gounod's Romeo et Juliet. The other, I completely forgot Adamo. Mark Adamo, one of our newer composers, 20th century composers, actually wrote a fantastic lyric mezzo role in Little Women for the lead character Joe. And he also had the older sister Meg singing in a mezzo range. So usually by a lyric mezzo, sometimes there's some crossover there. But this is a great example of, I don't want to say catch-all voice type, but it is a more flexible voice type within the mezzo range, and it's the most common mezzo. So 90% of the time when you meet a mezzo, they're probably a lyric mezzo, and maybe they can sing some of that coloratura rep, but they probably are more naturally a lyric. And then, in terms of some famous mezzos you've heard in this type, Isabel Leonard, Joyce DiDonato, again, a lot of your more common mezzos are probably in the lyric type for the most part. Then we've got our dramatic mezzos. So dramatic mezzos tend to do more of like the older ladies, our witches and our moms. These are usually very rich, like warm tones. They're very thick voices. Verdi and Wagner actually really did favor this type of mezzo. So when they had mezzo roles in their operas, we tended to hear it to be more dramatic. So Azucena from Verdi's Il Trovatore, for instance. And then there's also a really famous leading role for a dramatic mezzo, Delilah in Saint-Saëns, Samson and Dalila. So famous like title role here. So now, okay, so we had soprano, we had mezzo, now we're going into contralto. And this is not the same as your chorus contralto. So like when you're in a choir and you hear soprano, alto, tenor, bass, not quite the same range that we're talking here. A true operatic contralto is a very low female range. It's usually the F below middle C to a high F, so not a particularly high range. It's actually a very similar range to a male countertenor. And we'll talk about the male ranges on Wednesday when I'm back with you. But for today, just know that they kind of cross over quite a bit. So prior to the 1800s, the contralto sound really was viewed as very unromantic and not sexy. So it wasn't written very much. It was usually only used for old people, unpleasant characters. Sometimes your humorous characters would get this kind of a voice type. The only Russians kind of broke that trend. Russians did like contraltos, and they would sometimes break into that and use them for younger characters like Olga and Onegin. But it's worth noting that there's not a lot of true, 100% true contraltos out there. And so it's not really a voice type that's very common. And it's also not a role that's written very often. Like, it's not something you see in scores. You might have a mezzo role that lives on the low side that can be sung by a true contralto, but often it's not written with that in mind. So again, like mezzo and soprano, you have your coloratura contraltos. They have a lot more flexibility in their voice. And actually there's a lot of thought that Rossini was actually intending Rosina from Il Barbiere di Seville, Barbara of Seville, to be a coloratura contralto, as well as the Lied and La Cenerentola, but they're often sung by mezzos now. So there's some crossover right there for you. Then we've also got our lyric contraltos. So again, very much like, you know, sopranos and mezzos, coloratura, lyric. Some famous lyric roles for a contralto: Lucretia in Britten's Rape of Lucretia, or the Principessa in Puccini's Suor Angelica. Those are some good, meaty lyric contralto roles. And then dramatic roles. I don't even know if I would really classify some of the more famous roles as a true dramatic contralto role, but again, there's so much crossover that it's really hard to say definitively. And there's not a lot of great recordings out there. In fact, I wanted to recommend some recordings for you to listen to of this particular voice type, and I couldn't find any easily accessible. So if you have any, send them my way so I can share them out. That would be great. But these are the really low, really dark, really heavy, immense voices. This should be like your heaviest, thickest, darkest female voice. So there's a lot of meat there in that dramatic range. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, send my way. Oh, I see actually, I don't know, I will have to look up, how do you say that, Jordi Savall? I will have to look that up because that sounds like somebody I should be listening to. If you have a chance, look him up, her up. Definitely send questions my way. Every day at 12:15, we do one of these Opera 101s. There are several of us on staff who jump on, so we all try to take some questions from you as well as hit some of the things that we're interested in. So send questions over. You can comment now. You can send them to me via email. And also make sure you check out our website. We have a whole bunch of different Opera Online offerings for this quarantine time. So tonight, for instance, at 5 o'clock, we're going to jump on for happy hour to talk about Nixon in China. So you should definitely join us at 5 o'clock. It'll be via Zoom. There's a link on our website as well as in the event. And then Wednesday evenings, we have Page to Stage. Scott Skiba has different designers and folks involved with our production of Carmen who are coming on to share with you how the production is coming along. So we're scheduled for September. Hopefully coronavirus has bitten the dust by then so we can get on with the production. And then on Fridays, we have interactive master classes. So definitely keep an eye on the schedules. Definitely email us if you see anything, want anything, have any questions. If you just want to chat, I'm always around. So it's been a pleasure. Again, my name's Megan Thompson. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach for Cleveland Opera Theater. And I think Scott's going to be on with you tomorrow, but I'll be back on Wednesday. So tune on in and visit our website at clevelandoperatheater.org for more information and more events. Thanks so much. Have a great day.